It's Emil Guillermo. Emil, I'm up to you. What a night it was last night. Did you not feel what I felt on an election night? I mean, it's something that, well, if it excites me, the host of the micro talk show of the AAPI and the AAXs, it should excite you. Oh my goodness. Hey, I'm Emil Guillermo. As we like to say, be here, bang the gong now. EmilGuillermo.media on Facebook, or maybe you're watching this on YouTube, or maybe you're watching this on at Emil Amok on Twitter. This is, as I say, the micro talk show, the AAPI and the AAXs, or if you're not any of those, you're just in all the rest of them. And we're speaking in English, we're speaking the same language. And I think last night indicates the power of Asian American political might or acumen. What a night. I mean, everyone is looking to Virginia still now, because, Virginia is the big picture. It's a gubernatorial race. People looking to Virginia to try to figure, and New Jersey, to try to figure out what went wrong. What went wrong? But how about what went right? What went right is what went right in Massachusetts, in Boston. What went right for Bruce Harrell in Seattle? What went right for Aftab Puraval in Cincinnati? I mean, it was people aren't noticing it much. They're noticing Michelle Wu, because she's the mayor now of a city that elected white men for over 200 years, right? It's the cradle of our democracy, right? They elected white men for 200 years, except yesterday. They elected the president of the Boston City Council, Michelle Wu. And it goes to show you the takeaway for this Asian American victory in Boston, Cincinnati, and Seattle. Those are good examples. Hey, Tip O'Neill was right. All politics is local. Local, the grassroots. That's where it was communicated. That's where victory was communicated. And that's where these historic wins were had in Boston. The first elected female person of color, Asian American. I mean, there have been something like 5, in history who have been elected mayor. One of whom was Jean Quan in Oakland, but almost all of them exclusively in California. Here's Boston. And Michelle Wu gave a tremendous, if you've never seen Michelle Wu, I've talked about her. I've talked about her on this show. And I tried not to make a big deal of it, because she was mayor of Boston. She's a somewhat known quantity locally in Boston. She had an astronomical lead going into this, the final. So she wasn't going to lose. She didn't have to. The only thing during all the debates between the primary and now was just, would she stumble and get in her way? She didn't. She's a savvy politician. And she cut her teeth locally. And now people have to take notice, because what she did in Boston was put together a winning coalition. Imagine this. In Boston, where, an historically racist town and historically black and white. And I know this because I went to school there in that area. When I went to school there, they were doing the busing thing where there were race riots over forced integration. People said, not in my school. There's always a matter of resources between black and white. Not much brown, not much Asian, not when I was there. And now look what happened. They had an interim mayor who was a black female. She lost to Michelle Wu. And then Michelle Wu brought everyone together. The blacks, the Latinx, labor, women, she forged a winning coalition. And that really is the lesson. Local and winning coalitions. And who is driving it? Asian Americans. Well, in Boston, an Asian American woman, Michelle Wu, although she'll say, look, it's not about me. This is a team effort. This is not about me. And she's right. She always mentioned in her speech last night, she mentioned teamwork. She mentioned how it was the Wu train. In fact, that's her Twitter handle, Wu Train, WUTRAIN. Wu Train. The Wu Train was, I'm telling you, she's getting a little bit of notice now. She's breaking in to the front pages of the papers now because I just think because it's slow, because after the Virginia defeat of Terry McAuliffe, after the Republicans handed him his hat, and the closeness of the New Jersey gubernatorial race, I think people are just wondering on the national level, well, what's going to happen? Well, they got to play it local. I mean, that's how Youngkin won in Virginia, by playing it local. Same way Michelle Wu won, the same way that Bruce Harrell won in Seattle. Bruce Harrell, African American and Japanese. His mother was an internee. And then Aftab Buraval, his father, South Asian, mother, a Tibetan refugee. 39 years old. He's been running for things, hasn't won in the past, but here he goes in an environment where a lot of public officials have been indicted. There's a lot of corruption. They needed a new face. It was Puraval, this smart, handsome immigrant. I mention handsome because, you know, he's a retail level, right? He's sellable. You can see him and say, and he speaks English. University of Cincinnati law. He's married to a Caucasian woman. They've got a mixed race child. He's the future of Cincinnati. And he goes up against an 82-year-old council member who's been mayor twice, a white male. And if you're living in Cincinnati and you're given that choice, what are you going to do? You're going to embrace the future. You're not going to go backwards. And so Aftab Puraval wins Cincinnati, Seattle with Bruce Harrell, Michelle Wu in Boston. Read my column on the ALDEF blog, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund blog, aldef.org/blog. I spell it out, I guess. I mean, I talk about how everyone's looking at Virginia to get a sense of direction in American politics when most everyone is overlooking this other Michelle from Chicago, right? Not like Michelle Obama, right? Michelle Wu was born in Chicago, but she's making her name in Boston. And she's got the background, right? Daughter of Taiwanese immigrants, graduate of Harvard Law, a mentee of Elizabeth Warren. And what did she do? This is the way. She put together a broad coalition of blacks, Latinx, whites, women, union members. And suddenly, this divided city with a racist past emerges with an historic victor. And if you, as an Asian American, and all the rest of you, don't have some hope, I mean, this is real hope for a diverse nation, for our democracy. And you listen to her speech, and it's all about including people, inclusion. It's about hearing people, seeing people. You're part of the community. And now we see Michelle Wu doing her thing, and we feel part of this great nation. It's an it's an evolution, not a revolution, but an evolution politically. And it's fitting that it happens in Boston. An Asian American woman, the first elected mayor in Boston. She made us feel that way. So, Michelle Wu, she's been there in the council a long time. She's only 38. I think she's been there 10 years. She's been the president of the council. And that's the model, I think, local, then regional, state, then national. You see it in successful politicians like Kamala Harris. I mean, she's an example, but just think of all the Asian women. I mentioned this in my column. The country's 100 largest city, only 5 Asian American women have served as mayor, and all in California. And then think of all the other successful women in the political stratosphere. And at the top, you have Kamala Harris, vice president, South Asian and black. Senators Tammy Duckworth and Mazie Hirono. Mazie Hirono was lieutenant governor and a congresswoman. Long tail career. Politics. If you're a woman, age 38, who just has a knack. And I think people will be looking at Michelle Wu for a long time, because when you have this knack to bring people together, people are going to gravitate and say, lead us. So check out my column on the ALDEF blog, aaldef.org/blog. What a night. I mean, the Wu train. I mean, the Wu train it's real. The Wu train is for real. It's an AAPI victory trend. Let me bring on my good friend, observer of AAPI politics in general. He is the one of the key Asian American professors at San Francisco State University, the College of Ethnic Studies, one of the first place for ethnic studies in America. So, Dan Gonzalez, thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me again, Emil. Always good to see you.
Well, tell me, am I overstating the historic aspect of this victory of Michelle Wu and of Harrell in Seattle and Burrville in Seattle or in Cincinnati? Is it indicative of a kind of Asian American trend you haven't seen before? I mean, we've seen other Asian Americans in politics,
Sure.
but on this night, when everyone is looking at Virginia, here's this thing that people are overlooking. They're paying attention to Michelle Wu a little bit. But this speaks to an Asian American trait to bring people together, does it not?
It definitely does. I think Puraval, that win has not been getting covered at all, as far as
Not
I
at
can
all, yeah.
see.
Cincinnati too
At
small.
least not on the majors, and not on the two not Fox
Yeah,
cable networks. And that one's really, to me, very important because it's Ohio.
yeah,
They have two big cities, right? Cincinnati and Cleveland. Cleveland has a bit of because of Oberlin, right? It has a bit of a history of fighting slavery.
yeah,
But that one to me is a really strong indicator that we're even in really conservative states, and Ohio is one of those, right?
yeah,
An Asian American can get elected. Um, in
yeah,
Harrell's the case of Harrell, right? He's not Asian American. Well, he's half
yeah,
Japanese, half
yeah. Japanese American, black.
African American.
Yeah.
That's less of a surprise because it's on the West Coast.
Yeah. He's
Okay,
on the
and
West Coast, and he's been in local politics for a long time. I
sure,
mean, he's been in the city council at least for about more than a dozen years. He's been president of the city council, but it shows when people need a leader, a moderate Democrat, and Harrell is a moderate Democrat.
yeah,
That's the
he's a real moderate Democrat. I can't stand it when Cinema and Manchin get mentioned as moderates. They are not moderate Democrats. You
they're
know,
conservative.
very definitely, and
Yeah.
but so many commentators still call them moderate, and there's just no way. And I'm not judging them by um, the Democrat progressive standard. I'm judging them on the basis of what their positions are
Yeah.
on some of the most important issues that face the whole country.
Yeah.
And you can even go global issues like climate change.
Yeah.
Cinema has some strength on climate change, but Manchin, you know,
Well,
really bad.
one of the things that surprised me is that one of the loudest bit of applause that Michelle Wu got was when she mentioned that Boston was going to be part of the Green New Deal, and Boston is a pretty green city already.
Yeah, it is.
They look at Chinatown and say, it's hotter in Chinatown than it is out in other parts of the city. We got to do something like build more trees. Now that sounds like a simple thing, but just initiatives for more green space, for more green trees, for more, that is a solution to climate change. And when you put a park in Chinatown, that's a political statement. And they've done that in Boston. So when she says, hey, we're part of the green, we're going to make Boston the Green New Deal, they're already pretty greener than most cities.
Yes,
And
yes.
the activism there, they stopped a freeway back in the 70s, a 12-lane freeway going through a neighborhood where people said, not through my neighborhood. And that putting a neighbor or putting a freeway through a neighborhood is an example of the kind of redlining, the kind of environmental racism that
Yep.
takes place all across the country,
Yep.
most notably in California, in places like Stockton. They put
Well, and
a
historically, places like San Francisco,
yeah, oh yeah, places like San Francisco.
the Geary Boulevard expansion. Remember that?
Yeah,
That split the Fillmore district. Made it north is white and Japanese American to a certain extent, right?
right,
And
right.
south is black, and as simple as that. It was the equivalent of the ancient, really, racial covenants that
Yeah,
split the city in half, east and west, right?
yeah.
And there's still evidence of that resistance on the west side against the presence of non-whites.
See, now just the awareness that this is the legacy of how cities are built, that
Yes,
this is how
yes.
people are divided.
L.A. with
This,
all their freeways.
yeah,
Yeah.
this becomes not. It's green. It's social. It's, and also look, Michelle Wu is being called a progressive. I think she is. She's more progressive than say Mansion and Cinema, you know. But I think she's really a consensus builder. Maybe slightly more to the left than Harrell, who is really a consensus builder.
Yeah, he's pretty moderate. Yeah.
Yeah. But it speaks to this idea that in the future, maybe maybe the Democrats would have won someplace like Virginia last night had they taken a tip from these Asian Americans in terms of building coalition and going local. What do you think?
Yeah, that's possible. But I think McAuliffe, his campaign reminded me in a lot of ways of Hillary Clinton's campaign,
Oh yeah, yeah,
and they both failed for similar reasons. But in McAuliffe's case, he ran an anti-Trump campaign, which was backed up by President Biden. Uh, it was backed up by former President Obama. You know, and so that I think was a big mistake. I
Yeah.
think you got to run on the issues, and you got
Well,
to run on local issues. You started out your comments earlier with quoting,
Tip O'Neill.
yeah, the great, yeah, the great Massachusetts senator.
Right. Well,
You know, all politics is local, and I stress that in my classes. Um, and I work from the core of the local politics out to county, and you know, out to region, and out to state, and then I look at states and regions across state boundaries as well. And I try to get students to see that the United States is really very politically diverse. And you know, it's really obvious now, right? That the most difficult places to handle are the South and the Midwest, right?
yeah. Well,
Right in the middle of the country. Really difficult because they're really so far right, you know,
well,
extremely
well,
right.
well, just think if McAuliffe had gotten more local, because that's what
Yeah,
Youngkin did.
yeah,
Youngkin went local, running the gubernatorial race like it was a school board election. You know,
absolutely.
and yeah, and you and I know
Well, but
people that have run.
McAuliffe handed him that bullet.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Well, when he
he
said that,
handed it that he handed him that bullet and said, "Point the gun here." You
yeah.
know,
Well, when he says that parents shouldn't be telling educators what to do
well, that's
or
not
how to.
exactly what he said, but
Well,
he
I'm
said it.
paraphrasing.
Yeah, he said it in such. Excuse me.
Yeah, he said it in a way that uh,
Could be
it
parsed.
alienated
Yes,
parents.
yes.
It alienated parents. Say, "Whoa, what are you doing?" And now it made it akin to, "You're not going to tell me what I can do or can't do, or the mask or
It's that old
vaccines."
freedom thing again. You know,
Yeah,
and it walks right into that marginal area between simple, simple nativistic idealism, if you want to call it idealism,
yeah,
and this whole sense of freedom. You know, where you've got this toxic nationalist notion of what is personal freedom.
yeah.
Uh,
I really think that I nothing that McAuliffe did over the last few months really inspired any kind of confidence. I mean, I knew it was close, but I did not see any energy around his candidacy. I didn't see, if anything, people were saying, I'd like to see what the Democrats will do, and the Democrats did not pass the Biden legislation, so big thing that
that was
uh,
a big deal.
yeah,
You know, that
McAuliffe could
that
have
really
said,
hurt. That really hurt Biden on the international stage.
yeah. And
Because you know he's going to go forward and talk about the need to what the needs were for a fairer process in terms of global trade and also climate change.
yeah,
And so none of that stuff passed. He sounds like a guy that's talking the same old dance, right, or the same old song that he's doing the same dance and singing the same song that he did when he was campaigning and in the first few months of of his presidency. And
yeah.
so even though it's been 10 months basically, going into an 11th month since he was sworn in, people have expectations, and especially when you continuously build up what you're going to do. And it wasn't just Biden that was doing this; everybody was doing this, and most loudly, the progressives were doing it.
Yeah, but
And
Dan, Dan, the thing is, there is a difference. There is a difference in the kind of environment we're in politically. I mean, when Trump was president, it was like what grenade, what bomb, what's going to blow up today?
oh yeah,
We don't have that today. Although we still have the Trump, how are we going to adjudicate against Trump? How are we going to you know, put his people behind bars, or how are we going to find out what happened on January? I mean, we're 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 really prosecuting Trump or trying to, he's not there, he's not leading, but we still get the Trump issues, in the news, but they're not in the same way that they were, say, when people are always like,
I
palm
think
to the
that's
head,
I
palm
think
to the
that's part of the
face.
problem. Again, once again, you come back to McAuliffe's campaign, and it was anti-Trump, and he
Yeah,
was trying to compare Trump to Youngkin.
yeah,
He correctly cited the fact that Trump made at least seven very strong statements in endorsement of Youngkin,
yeah,
and in his last couple of statements at the event that was not attended by Youngkin himself, right?
yeah,
He said, "Oh no, we're really tight." I mean, he said, "Yeah, I talk to him all the time,"
yeah,
and I think what's happened is Youngkin's tactics are really a template. They're going to be a template for how Republican candidates can run.
yeah.
Right?
How do you keep distance, or arm's length from Trump,
You don't
and
want to
still
alienate him completely because he'll say bad things about you.
see? I that is a real middle road dump Trump view. I mean, because but it's the only way that you can exist as a Republican, because the party is still embracing Trump. So if you want to be an enlightened, you can't be a never Trumper. You have to be a an often not Trumper, but
Yeah, even if
to be a
even if they're
Republican.
loosening their embrace of Trump, even if
Yeah,
more and more people are saying, "Yeah, it's not a good thing," and it's not a good thing for the Republican Party, it's not a good way to run. There's still, it's over 70% of the Republican Party believes that the election was stolen.
right, right.
Okay,
So
so regardless of how they feel directly about Trump, they're distrustful of government is profound, right? The distrustfulness of government is profound,
yeah,
and it's accompanied by a distrust of the electoral process, of the voting process itself.
well, yeah,
So
which
it'd
they
be really
think is
interesting
yeah.
to see, ask the Republicans in Virginia, particularly, right? How do you feel about the electoral process now? Do you think voting is trustworthy now that you've won? Okay.
Right. Well, that's the thing, and I really think that Trump. I think we're sort of moving into a post Trump way of
Yes, we
being
are. I
with
agree.
him and with everything. And I think really what the answer, Michelle Wu's answer was, let's get the let's get Asian Americans are kind of this in this perfect place where they're mixers, they are competent, they are smart, they can bring people together, and they're savvy, so they know they're inclusive. I mean, you listen to what Michelle Wu's message was in her
Yeah.
final speech, and it was all about, hey, I can't do this alone, we're doing this as a team. I'm making sure we're all seen, we're all heard. It was I think it's the way to bring back those people who distrust government, right? It's, you say, hey, look, we're competent, we'll take care of things. I mean, the way she got into government is, the story I read was that she ran a tea shop, and there were all these, bureaucratic things and hoops and licenses and things that she had to get, go through. And she when she used it it was one of the reasons why she went to law school. She realized, oh, something's got to be easier about government and about these laws. I just think that there's so much in her story that makes her appealing. There's that, and then there's the fact that she's Asian American, not a tiger mom, but a woman who took care of her mother. She got out of Harvard, and instead of going into the corporate world, she was working at the Boston Consulting, right? Boston Group. And her mother was having a hard time with a health issue, and also her divorce. She took care of her mother, and she took care of her little sisters. She's a caregiver. She's empathetic. That recommends someone who wants to be a public service or a public servant. And to me, that was, you see that, and it builds up all this credibility when someone's saying, "Come on, let's be inclusive, let's work together." I think Michelle Wu has a big future ahead.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. Um, I uh, I think things can turn around. How do you feel about 2022?
Well, a lot of people were
Everybody's
looking.
saying this is a wake up call for Democrats. Yeah, of course, but
Yeah.
what can they do about it? You
Well,
know,
you saw already what Nancy Pelosi did today. She put back the child credit, the family leave, the paid leave. She put that back in to the big soft infrastructure bill, the social infrastructure bill, because she knew that, we took it out because we were going to compromise, but we're going to put it back in because this is what people want. This is what people need. So I think uh, the wake up call was, hey, we can't build back better cheaper. We have to really build back better. We got to put in all these things that we took out. And I think that it's scaring everyone just to not be so political, but to really look at what people want and need, because it's clear that no matter where you are in the spectrum, Republican or Democrat, you're looking to see what people can provide. And there's enough people in the middle, right? Because McAuliffe lost a lot of those Biden voters who they went from blue to red, right?
right? They swap
So,
back and forth, and
yeah,
that's an old phenomenon. You know,
yeah,
that's the reason that independents grew in numbers. Is
wow,
they were alienated from the two party system because beginning what 40 years ago during the Reagan period, there was intransigence. It all just happened. A lot of the major issues weren't being directly addressed. Right? How many? Okay. Yeah, well, the difficult thing is that you got two senators who are Democrats in name that are holding back progress in the Senate. Now, how do you feel about what the progressives did in terms of saying we're going to put both of these measures together, we're going to link them
yeah.
in absolute terms, and we're going to push for their passage in absolute terms?
Hey, I like what they did. I think they did the smart thing. They've got the leverage now. They've got the power now. And as I said a minute ago, it boils down to, what do people need? What is it that the nation needs? And this whole idea of fiscal conservatism, and from on Manchin's part, and uh, to see what the Senate has done over the last, and during the Trump years, doesn't cut it. You got to give people what they need, and then I think that I guess what Biden is banking on, if you show people that you're going to give them something, then now you could take that to the people, and what are the people going to say? Oh, you're giving me all these benefits. You're giving me all these good things. Oh, we're going to vote you out? Not if they're honest. And I know that we got to hope for some honesty, some integrity on the part of the voters.
Well, look
It's
how long. Okay, see, okay, I one, I think the strategy of linking the two uh, in absolute terms was okay up until it was clear that Manchin and Cinema were going to balk, and they're not just balking because they're uncertain. That's the part they play, right? I just don't know. I don't think I have enough information. I haven't seen it. It's not laid out clearly. I haven't seen anything. They didn't come down with the terminology, actual terminology, until about a week and a half ago. So they were using that as a rationale, and it sounds reasonable. Sounds reasonable to a lot of people. The reality is that Manchin is in the back pocket of fossil fuel.
oh yeah, yeah,
Okay,
in West Virginia, yeah.
and
His whole
cinema
family
is in the
is.
back pocket of large scale finance. You know, that's where they're getting their money. And so it was completely predictable. Once journalists got a hold of the information on where these people were getting their money in their political campaigns, And once it was clear that especially cinema was going to dinners and meetings with heavy hitter financial donors, right? Um, that they're bought.
Yeah.
They're bought. And so,
That
so you gotta change your tactics.
that's
Instead,
one.
progressives still said we're gonna pay. Jayapal said it this morning. We're gonna get past these two things this week.
Yeah.
Okay. What they should have done, in my opinion, is once they got the Senate to support the infrastructure bill, right? They should have argued about the larger Build Back Better bill with all of the social infrastructure, right? And then once they saw what Manchin and Sinema were going to do, they should have had a strategy, okay, for voting for pushing the vote in the lower house
Oh, so
to pass
half.
the infrastructure bill. Okay, that's what they should have done, because then Biden would have something in hand. Okay,
Okay. I see
everybody
that.
else.
I see that. It's a practical thing. I think it makes sense, but I think they felt that, hey, we've got our leverage. We're going to make it
Yeah,
happen.
I
And you
disagree with
know,
that entirely.
therefore they were forcing Biden to say, look, Jayapal was saying Biden says he has the votes. Biden says he's talked to Manchin. We're going to put it on him. That was their move, but they're putting it on Biden,
Yep.
but it could risk their next two if Biden goes down and everyone goes down in the midterm. It's
And by putting it
risky.
on Biden, they were opening Biden up to criticism from the right.
Yeah.
And
Well, look,
you know, uh,
wait,
it's, it's
I
not it's not Biden's fault. The reality is he's been doing things correctly. If he has a fault, his fault was his idealism about the possibility of doing across the aisle cooperation
yeah,
and bipartisanship. I think that's grossly naive, given
see, but
given
yeah,
the
look,
way that the Republicans have behaved since let's see, since at least Bush two,
yeah.
if
But I
not if
mean,
not earlier,
the
right?
bipartisan,
Became
yeah,
they became the party of no, as described by Obama, and
yeah,
accurately so. You
yeah.
know,
The bipartisan talk. I remember listening to both years, both inaugurals of Obama talking about bipartisan talk, and it goes well in January and then it fades off. It never. I was hoping that people had seen enough in the last 4 years that, especially after January 6th, that maybe we were going to go in a new direction, but it's still going to be tougher. But this is what's interesting. Given yesterday, we're looking at everyone's looking at the gubernatorial races, Virginia, New Jersey. They're trying to predict what's going to happen in the midterm. But I
yeah,
think have the locals have a positive way of looking at what happened yesterday. If you look at Seattle, Cincinnati, and you look at Michelle Wu in Boston, this is how you build the kind of meaningful coalitions that make people move together, that create history. I mean, that's what we're talking about.
yes,
I mean,
absolutely,
Burvell in Cincinnati was history. Harrell made some history because first Asian American mayor and second African American mayor. And then Wu certainly made history. Asian American woman, person of color, elected first in 200 years. That kind of historic thing, I think the mainstream media is really giving it short shrift. They got to look at it
they are
seriously.
not. Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree with you
they're
completely.
not giving it the attention it deserves because it would seem too easy. Oh, work together, form a coalition. Well, it's harder than they think. But I think what Michelle Wu pulled off, beating Mayor Janney, African American, appointee, beating her in the primary, and then bringing her and her supporters together, Latinx, women, labor. Man, that that's skill. That's some skill, some
Yeah.
political skill. And
Well, yeah. You remember the Alinsky method, and we've talked
yeah,
about it.
rules for radicals.
Yeah, that's the book. But his method is about doing a careful analysis of local issues. What do the people need? It's really basic, right?
Mhm.
And then you organize around those needs, because the people identify immediately, right, with the reality of what they need. And I just bought a book that's rather old now. I forgot to pick it up years ago. It's probably about a decade old now, but if not more. But Mike Miller was a an organizer that came to the Bay Area when during let me think. Wow, in the '70s as an organizer. So I was really surprised that he didn't put his book out until about a decade ago. It's probably around 2009. And then I put a marker on it, and then I forgot to buy it. So recently, I of course looked it up. I just got a copy, and it's a used copy, but I just got a copy, and to refresh my memory about not just the rules for radicals, right, but also the methodology, the organizing methodology, and intellectuals on the right. Okay, I know it's hard to imagine,
Mhm.
but intellectuals on the right
There's some.
have criticism. There are. Okay, but that's a whole nother thing we
Yeah.
could talk
Well,
about. Is that
Buckley was certainly an intellectual on the right.
sure,
Yeah.
but Buckley's dead,
Well,
long dead.
the best
Okay,
ones are dead,
yeah,
unfortunately.
long dead. George Wills probably gets close, right?
Okay.
He's gotten a little long in the tooth now, and he makes mistakes more regularly than he did, let's say, even 10 years ago. But he gets close. Um, but yeah, William F. Buckley is an excellent model of a real conservative intellectual. And you're right, they do exist, but the society has become very anti-intellectual. Okay, increasingly so,
Yeah. Well,
particularly
yeah.
after the Bush two
Well,
era,
just
right?
look at yesterday with the Virginia race about critical race theory. People are scared about what they don't know about. And there's no one's teaching critical race theory in Virginia, but
Right.
they're scared. But
Well,
people are scared of it.
at the graduate level, there may be somebody teaching about critical race theory at the
Yeah, but
graduate level.
not in the public schools,
No, not at all.
not
Not
K
at all.
12,
But
and that
okay, here's I'm getting a lot of thought to this. What they're afraid of is not just critical race theory, because as everybody points out, it doesn't exist. It's not enough to say it doesn't exist. It's not being taught in the schools, because the reality is it does exist. Okay, and at the when you look at what it means, right, to do critical race, okay, it's just a critical assessment of the racial history and reality of American society. Okay,
so
and
white
so they
people
see that as threatening. They
so
see
white
that as
pe-
threatening.
yeah, white people are afraid that all this negative talk will contribute to their low self-esteem.
Yeah, to the children's low self-esteem. That's
The
correct.
children,
That's
yeah,
what they believe. That's
yeah,
what they believe. What the reality is, that they're afraid that they'll have to recognize the reality of their history, and that their people are going to think you once you understand the real history of American society, you got to understand you're also responsible, right,
yeah,
for the effects of that history, the lasting effects, right, of that history. They don't want to do that. They
yeah.
don't want to see the society and the government generally as being responsible for addressing the effects, the generations long effects of their racism, and the reality of racial institutions,
Right.
racist, I'm sorry, institutions. Yeah, I'm sick and tired of seeing quotes. It's so easy for me to get quotes, live quotes, right, from Republicans who say, I do not think that there is institutional racism in American society. Okay? It's the easiest thing to find them saying that. They just are absolutely in denial of it. And every day we have examples of it, from day to day institutional obviousness, right? It's
Yeah.
just
Well,
really obvious.
well, Dan,
And the
this is
first
this is
example
the
is policing, and the second example is judicial behavior. Look at
Yeah.
this guy, in Kenosha, right? What
Yeah.
does the judge
Rittenhouse.
say?
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, yeah. He says,
you can't call them victims.
yeah.
Okay, but it's okay to call them rioters, right? And because if the defense can say and show that they were doing rioting and construction destructive behavior, then that helps to
Yeah.
explain the rationale of this
Well,
defendant's
still,
behavior.
Dan,
He kills two, wounds one, a third person, right? And he's going to say, "I did it in self defense."
well, we're going to have to follow the Rittenhouse trial maybe a little later. There's also the Ahmaud Arbery trial,
Yeah, that's right.
where they're using citizens arrest as a key point. But that's for another day. But I think what we have here is we have these people are communicating and miscommunicating in politics, and then they're voting for all the wrong reasons. I mean, how do you think that all the people who are Trump supporters would vote against their own self-interest? That's a perfect case of miscommunication to benefit Trump, to get all these people who won't benefit from any of his
Well,
policies
that
because
is
they're not in
truly
the
the
1%.
I agree with you completely. I mean, it's truly the greatest irony, right? Is that
Yeah,
they are voting and they are acting and they are thinking in exactly the ways that do the most harm to themselves, and then they blame it on us. They blame it on people of color. They blame it on liberals. They blame it on progressives, and they blame Democrats generally, right?
yeah, and
So
this is why I think Democrats, instead of like licking their wounds and saying, "Oh, Terry McAuliffe, he was a bad candidate. He should have been more local," I think they could save a lot of time just by looking at how Asian Americans did on Tuesday, leading with Michelle Wu, looking at Bruce Harrell's campaign in Seattle, looking at Aftab Puraval in Cincinnati, and seeing how I think it's really, there's something about Asian American politicians. We've had them all along. There's a lot of them, but not nearly as many as there should be. We're still relatively underrepresented, but hopefully this gives people who have a bent for for public office. It gives them confidence to run. Yesterday's show, I said the power. I don't run for office. I thought about it when I was younger, when we had friends running for school board in San Francisco. I thought about it way back when, but I I see the power being on this side, being not as a public servant, but being as the public master. The voter is the public master, and the voter has the power. And yesterday, the voters showed their power by voting for Youngkin in Virginia, by voting for Michelle Wu in Boston, by voting for people who, first woman in 200 years, right, in Boston. The voter has the power. And I
yeah,
think,
I think that my hope is one for the younger generations that because they're asking the right questions and they're standing up
yeah,
and criticizing the older generations, particularly those people who are nominally conservative, quote unquote.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, there's
so
certainly young people, start local. I mean, two new South Asians gotten into the New York City Council. There was the first in Boston, the first, I believe, Muslim American, the first formerly undocumented person. It was elected to the city council. First African immigrant elected to the city council. So there's going to be all these firsts in politics. If that's your
I think
bent,
they also got three or four in. Are you talking about New York?
I'm talking about New York had Indian. They had two Indian
Right,
in the
right. That's right.
council, and Boston had that this Muslim American from
Right, right, right.
African American in.
Yeah, but in the
This-
instance of New York, I think they also voted in four Republicans onto this.
Hey, diversity. Diversity's
Well, I want to take a closer look
yeah.
at the
Well, I
backgrounds of those four. Are
yeah.
they the kind of people that I think are going to be selected by Republicans to do primaries, particularly against the other eight people who voted, the other 8 Republicans who voted to impeach Trump. You know,
Yeah. Well, I
yeah.
just think that going forward, we have to. I think the idea of what Michelle Wu did, bringing together a coalition, people working together. Republican, no matter what your gender, your race, your ideology, your party. I think that kind of ideological diversity goes a long way too in building strong coalitions. Now, whether or not people can hang out there, away from the party and have that kind of independence, maybe you can do that easier on a local level, but then on a national level. But look at Mansion, look at how and Cinema, look at how they are like crippling their entire party by
Yep,
hanging out and being independent. For I don't know how principled they are, considering how they're bought by corporates,
that's right.
by big funding. So
Well, but I had a conversation with one of my former students who was involved in the two aspects of Virginia's politics, and one was, of course, supporting McAuliffe and other candidates down ballot, Democratic candidates down ballot, and the other was get out the vote
oh yeah,
as well. And we've kept in contact over the years. He did take my poli sci and constitutional history class in the Asian American Studies at SF State, like years and years ago. I think he's in his late. No,
so what do you say?
he's in his early 40s now, so it's not that long ago. But because I got a lot of other students who are very much more active politically, and I was shocked at how old they are, how long it's been. They started saying, "Oh no, I'm 58," and I thought, "Whoa," you know.
Well, now they can come out and run. Now they should be inspired by all the Asian Americans who are victorious. And like I said, it's not like there haven't been Asian American, victories in the past, local victories. But there is
Oh,
something
big
about
ones.
last night.
Yeah, big ones. I mean, we were late getting started for the most part. I mean, you got to go. There were a few people who were elected into office before the Second World War, but
Yeah.
the most easily traceable, right,
Mhm.
level of important participation
Mhm.
of people winning elections. Patsy Mink
Oh yeah,
and
Norm Mineta. Come on, Norm Mineta.
Norm Mineta, but that's more local and more recent. Also, I
More
was thinking
well.
about Daniel Inouye.
Oh, in a way.
Right.
So you're talking about
I think
Hawaii.
he had at least 5 terms, 5 6 year terms in the Senate.
Yeah.
So
Well, but Norm started it as a San Jose mayor,
right,
right?
right,
And then he moved up. There are other examples. After him came Mike Honda, who was a school teacher. I mean, there were examples of Asian Americans in politics, but now I just think yesterday we're at a new level,
right.
a new level, and uh,
We get a
I
lot of staffers. I encourage students, particularly those that have political science backgrounds. What surprises me is when I describe what legislative staffers do. Right, they're not the same as campaign or
oh yeah, they're separate. They're
office holder
separate.
staff. Where
Oh
they're legislative staffers who work for this. They work for the state of California,
yeah,
right?
and you can't.
And those are great jobs, and a lot of the influence, particularly in California, because we have term limits.
Yeah,
It's
they
been
got to move
modified
around.
somewhat, but when you get new people who haven't held office before or only held lower office at the very local level, right, and they win races and have to go to Sacramento, um, their first term is a learning curve.
Yeah. Well,
Sometimes first and second terms are learning curves. The
look,
power is with the staffers.
Michelle Wu, 10 years at the city council. Hey,
Right.
listen, Dan, I've got to run, but I want to make sure that when we talk again, we talk about big money. You mentioned the big money of Kirsten Cinema and Joe Manchin, how they're bought and paid for essentially. And that is one of the reasons why people are turned off to politics, the big
Exactly.
money in politics. And that's
Exactly.
one of the reforms that has to happen in order to make politics more
Fair.
egalitarian, more fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that next time. I thank you for coming on the day after.
Well, you're quite welcome. It's
And
always fun sharing
yeah.
perspectives.
All
All
right.
right, man.
Dan Gonzalez from
Thank you.
San Francisco State University's College of Ethnic Studies. The original College of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State University. And it's special. The day after yesterday, when you saw Michelle Wu win in Boston, she'll get short shrift. She'll get like a little headline. She'll get, in the Times or the Post, but subsequent to this day. I mean, because this day everyone's talking about Virginia. They're talking about New Jersey. They're talking about the gubernatorial races, the big local, the regional. But don't despair when you understand what happened in Boston and in Seattle and in Cincinnati, where Asian Americans created coalitions. I mean, you can't be 6% or less of an electorate and win without having skill at bringing people together. That's the Asian American difference. And that's going to be the story of the election of 2021. In my opinion, you go to my ALDEF column, aaldef.org/blog. That's going to be the lasting memory. Not that Joe Biden was upended, because, you look at some of these politicians, Tweedledee, Tweedledum, right? I mean, is it really that different in some respects amongst the mainstream politicians? But you take the local races and you try to build a coalition. That's the skill. And all those people, like Bruce Harrell in Seattle is like 63, but Michelle Wu is like 38. After Buraval is 39 in Cincinnati. Politics has a long tail. They're going to have long careers if they continue doing what they do. Okay, Emil Guillermo here. Hey, I don't have time to talk about Aaron Rodgers' lie. I was going to go and whole thing about sports. I'm saddened about Henry Ruggs because if you're a Raider fan, God, Henry Ruggs was doing like 156 in his Corvette, according to reports, and of course he's been accused now of a DUI. He's been released by the Raiders. It's sad. Aaron Rodgers has COVID. He's out at least 10 games. What's really surprising is he's unvaccinated. He had a cop to that. When after all this time, you thought he was vaccinated. Unvaccinated. I guess he's not a paragon of truth. He's just a quarterback. But if you were looking at him the last couple of months and saying, oh, yeah, sports hero, unvaccinated, lied about it. And then the World Series went to the Braves, the Tomahawk Choppers. I hope they get rid of the Tomahawk Chop. I can't really see them as champions. 88 wins. It's tough when you have when it's a tough sport when the teams that won the most, the Giants and the Dodgers, weren't playing for the World Series. And a team like the Atlanta Braves with 88 wins bought all their best players after the trade deadline, post, mid-season. They go on to win it all. And will anyone really care about who won the World Series? I mean, in 5, 10, if you didn't live in Atlanta, if you don't live in Atlanta, is anyone going to care? Baseball's in trouble. Look, I'll talk more about that tomorrow, but it's time now to say goodbye. We're here, like I said, Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific. The micro talk show of the AAPI and the AAX. We talk about the AAPI like we count. We count. We talk about Michelle Wu's victory like it matters. It matters to all of America. Right? Of course, you don't have to be an AAPI or AAX to listen to this show. Read my column on ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's aldef.org/blog. ALDEF. No pun there. ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. What else can I say? You can, see my columns there. You can check me out on Facebook, EmilGuillermo.media. I guess they're going to strip our face recognition away. See my past columns and my past shows on amok.com. All right. Where you can also email me if you wish at Emil, EMIL, at amok.com. So I hope you got something out of today's show. Thank you for being here. If you listen to our show, at the end, this is an important part of the show. This is an important part of the show where, we give ourselves an attaboy or an attagirl. We say you belong. We say you're worth it. We say, hey, don't feel shame. Feel inspired. Michelle Wu won. Get on the Wu train. Bruce Harrell, half Japanese American, half African American. He won in Seattle. Get excited about Aftab Buraval in Cincinnati. We won. Asian American Pacific Islanders, the AAXs. We belong. We're worth it. Give yourself a hug. And as I say, or as I wish for myself, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Emil Guillermo here. Till next time. Mahal